This is Christy Reading on ABC New England Northwest.
Cashless gaming technology has emerged as a key election issue as both sides of politics take sides on a gambling industry crackdown. But not everyone is entirely on board with Premier Dominic Perrottet's plan to turn the state's 90,000 plus gaming machines cashless, including independent Barwon MP Roy Butler.
It's hard to comment with any kind of certainty because neither the government nor the opposition have actually put anything in writing. It's just talk about what they propose to do. There certainly needs to be an acknowledgement that problem gambling causes damage in our society. It damages people and families, and there needs to be something done about it. Whether or not cashless gaming cards is the answer, I think is something that when there is something in writing, I'll take back to my communities and back to clubs in my electorate and talk to them and say, well, tell me how this would work and what would the impact be on your club. So we really need to see something in writing to see what's been proposed by both sides of government.
But you do have some concerns about this crackdown?
If you put a regulation in place that affects gaming machines, that affects gaming machines, but there's a stack of other forms of gambling that won't affect, and if somebody's determined to gamble, they're going to go and find a way to do that. I suppose it's a bit like, if you treat a drug and alcohol addiction with chemical or with naltrexone or some other medication to stop someone doing it, is that dealing with the root cause? And I think what we've got to get to is a point where we're actually dealing with the root cause for problem gambling. Certainly the symptom is people going out and doing things that cause damage to themselves, damage to their family, and that's something we need to deal with. But like I say, if we deal with poker machines or gaming machines through cashless gaming cards, what does that mean for other forms of gambling that people aren't regulated in and can go and access? Is it going to stop people gambling altogether? I suspect not. But we've also got to look at the difference, as I said to you, between some of those big metro clubs where you've got thousands of members, hundreds of employees and millions of dollars coming through the club, to some of our smaller clubs which might only have a handful of employees out west, and if the reform is affordable for them to implement.
You've fielded concerns from people within the community about the reform?
Yeah, certainly I've heard from people in the community, and there's people who want to see something done about problem gambling, as do I. I'm not a huge fan of poker machines or anything like that. I can guarantee you I'm not being supported by that industry. It's more a case of saying, well, and apart from people in the community, I've heard from obviously clubs in my electorate, which are different to those larger metro clubs. I think, again, there is an acknowledgement something needs to be done, and what I would encourage is the government of the day, whether that's the current LNP government or a future LNP government or a future Labor government, to work with industry to make sure that anything that's implemented has the desired impact in reducing problem gambling, but also make sure that those clubs, which are hubs in our communities, continue to operate and can continue to survive and employ people.
What other strategies do you think could work?
I think the root cause stuff is really important. So when we talk about people who end up problem gambling, like there's a neurological response that they get from gambling. And obviously the poker machine companies have been very successful in capitalising on the excitement with music and lights and all sorts of things. But there's a reason people are doing that in the first instance. So I think more education at a young age, that's obviously not going to fix the problem for the people who are problem gamblers right now, but more education at a young age. And this comes back to the same thing I've talked about a lot in this term of Parliament around financial literacy and understanding how money works, essentially, because if people understand the odds of actually losing money when gambling, they'd probably be less likely to gamble.
Roy Butler, member for Barwon, joins us here on ABC New England Northwest. And Mr. Butler, no doubt there'll be people listening this morning to this interview who have or know people who have challenges, problems with gambling as well. What's your guarantee to them beyond the election, as negotiations continue around what this reform and crackdown might look like?
Look, one of my former backgrounds was I was a drug and alcohol and addictions counsellor, group psychotherapist, so it's something that I actually have some familiarity with. And certainly I know the harm that it causes, whether it's gambling or drug and alcohol addiction. So it's something that is dear to my heart and something that I want to see addressed. But it's got to be done in a way that has the desired outcome. We're actually going to impact on problem gambling, but also is going to make sure that, as I said, those facilities in communities remain, that it's affordable for them to implement. And if that means it needs some sort of subsidy from government to operate, then that's what government should look at.
Do you honestly believe that there is a solution that's going to appease both sides, those who are concerned about problem gambling versus those who are concerned about the future of jobs and, the industry that revolves around gambling?
that solution comes about through consultation and negotiation with communities and with the industry and all stakeholders, and that's something that, as I said, I would encourage government to really reopen that stakeholder negotiation with the people who are concerned about problem gambling, with the industry and with communities to make sure that they land a good response, a good result that actually has the desired effect.
Do you have concerns over the pace of this conversation? Of course, we are leading up to a government election. I mean, do you have concerns around that?
Oh, I think if it's worth doing, and I think it is worth doing, reform of gambling is worth doing, and it's worth doing right, and I don't think anything like this should be rushed, otherwise you end up with perverse outcomes, which is what I want to avoid. If that means we take an extra 6 months to negotiate with stakeholders, the people concerned about problem gambling, the industry, communities, and make sure that we land in a good spot, I think it's worth taking that extra 6 months because we know what happens when regulation or legislation is moved too quickly. Because we end up with gaps, we end up with problems, things that fall through the cracks, and I don't want to see that happen on something so important.
Pending the outcome of the state election in March, and of course pending you being re-elected to the seat of Barwon, I mean, is there a side that you would prefer to work with on this?
Oh, look, I'll work with whoever's in government if I'm re-elected, and that's up to the people of Barwon. I've already demonstrated I can work with both sides of politics, all sides of politics really, upper house and lower house, so I'm not too worried about that. I will be able to work with whoever's there if I'm re-elected, and I look forward to doing that.
But there's not one or the other that you think is perhaps stronger on this front?
No, I've probably had more contact with the government purely because the government is in government and the ministers are currently ministers. But that said, I've got a good relationship with everyone in Parliament, and I'm sure I could work effectively with anyone.
That is Member for Barwon, Independent, Roy Butler there.